Hey gang, welcome back to another video. So I've always loved the idea of ghostly floating objects hanging around in our cemetery, but I'd always get hung up on how best to implement it based on our setup. So in this video, I'll show you the classic approach I took to install this long overdue effect in our haunt. So let's get into it. To kick things off, let's take a look at the main parts to the build. These measurements are specific to my build since I plan on hiding this behind a tombstone, but for the most part, these should be universal if you wanted to make one for yourself. First up is a length of hollow aluminum rod with eye hooks installed on each end, a 23-inch length of 1x3 pine that I've already drilled out a pass-through and mounting holes for, a 9-inch and two 7-inch pieces of 1x3 pine, a wiper motor, a 1/2-inch wide piece of flat stock aluminum, some miscellaneous hardware, and a 1-inch PVC coupling. There's a few more pieces that I added along the way, but I'll point those out when I get there. In the meantime, let's get started with the base for our mechanism. Because my candelabra is going to be cantilevered over a tombstone, I'm going to build an offset base for the mechanism. This will help to balance everything out a bit more once the motor and candelabra are installed. I'll mark off where the boards will go as well as where I'll add my pocket hole screws, and then I can get to assembly. I like to add a bit of wood glue to these kinds of builds, even though end grain cuts don't typically benefit all that much from the glue, but I figure it can't hurt. Then I add in my screws, wipe away any excess glue, and the base for our build is ready for the vertical motor support. Off camera, I marked out where the 1x3 should go, and then I can pre-drill my holes to prevent the wood from cracking. And once the holes are drilled, I'll apply a bit of wood glue and set the support in place. Now, because I'm a bit impatient and I didn't plan this better for filming, I'm going to use a bit of CA glue to quickly set the wood in position while the wood glue dries. And then I can get right to pre-drilling the matching holes into the vertical piece and placing 3 screws through the bottom to permanently mount it in position. The last part of the base will be the addition of these 2 angle brackets. In reality, they should be larger, but I wanted to see just how much of this build I could do with the supplies I had on hand, so these 1-inch brackets will have to do. These will get held in place with some 1/2-inch screws, and that's it for the base construction. The key part to making this effect work is a windshield wiper motor. To make sure the motor shaft is on the right side of the base, I added this pass-through hole and can mount the motor to the vertical bar with a few screws. Because the motor shaft sticks out a bit further than is needed for this type of mechanism, I'll be using these rubber feet that I found in a box in my shop. Ideally, you'd want to use some 1/2-inch nylon spacers, but again, I'm trying to use what I've got. So these got added to the ends of the screws, and then I could attach the motor. Next up is the addition of a coupling nut and a lock washer. The lock washer will prevent the coupling nut from loosening during operation, and since it's connected to the motor shaft, this is an absolute must. With the coupling nut tightened down onto the motor shaft, I can add on the crank arm. This piece was cut down to 5 inches long, and because the aluminum is a soft metal, I was able to add a few small bends to it to prevent it from running into any of the other parts of this mechanism. This got screwed into the other side of the coupling nut that's attached to the motor shaft with a bolt and a second lock washer. In order for this bar mechanism to work, I'll need to add a guide. I grabbed this 1-inch PVC coupler, which I drilled a large hole and a small hole into for easy installation, and marked off where I want to mount it. And once the hole was drilled, I placed a screw through the PVC coupler and a 1-inch nylon spacer and could secure it in place with a lock nut. You'll want to leave the connection slightly loose, since its ability to rotate will help with the motion of the candelabra. Off camera, I threaded the black aluminum tubing from the start of the video through the PVC coupler and attached it, along with some washers and a spacer, to the crank arm. At this point, you can see just how far out the candelabra will hover over my tombstone. And speaking of the hovering candelabra, it will be attached to the aluminum tube using this metal part from an old clamp light. It's what connects the lamp body to the spring clamp. Now, I'm fairly certain there's a better way to do this, but this should work for now. The last part of the mechanism is to add a speed controller to the wiper motor. While all wiper motors typically look the same, the wiring is completely unpredictable. So after testing all of the combinations, I found that the black wire was in fact the neutral wire, and the green wire was for low gear. I also wired up a barrel connector to the input of the speed controller so that I can use a 12-volt power supply to run the motor. It was at this point that I remembered I had some weatherproof project boxes in storage, and it happened to fit the speed controller. So I rerouted all of the wiring through the small hole in the side of the box and could close it up. The only thing left to do now was to plug in my power supply and test out the mechanism. Without working as expected, let's talk about the candelabra. This candelabra was something I found at a yard sale, and I've added some PVC candles with hot glue wax strips. I have an in-depth video on that process, and I'll link to it in the video description if you want to check it out. Now, the candelabra looks the part, but it needs to be upgraded a bit more. So my plan is to use this creepy cloth to bring some more movement to the prop, but also to hide some of the mechanism. And this bright white color isn't going to cut it. So I mixed a bit of dark brown acrylic paint and water and got to staining. The brown wasn't quite as dark as I'd have liked, so I went a bit more aggressive with the staining by adding in a bit of black and dark brown spray paint, making sure to constantly move the material around to minimize any unwanted heavy blocks of color. And when it felt like the staining was right, I let it dry for a moment, and then I draped it over my candelabra, and here's what it looks like all assembled. Overall, I think the movement is as I expected, but the bar that's holding the candelabra may need to be shortened to improve the effect. I may mess with it a bit more before Halloween to try and dial everything in a bit better, but for now, I think I can call this one done. Now, I'd planned on adding in some of the new flicker LEDs to complete the look, but unfortunately, time got away from me this week. Thankfully, there's still some time before Halloween to get it squared away. Well, that's going to do it for this one. Be sure to like and subscribe if you haven't already, but most importantly, go make something.